Did you take it? The question cut through the late afternoon air, sharp and cold, stopping everything around him like someone had pressed pause on the world. Marcus Reed froze mid-step on the cracked concrete sidewalk, the weight of the leather wallet suddenly heavy in his hand, heavier than it should have been for something so small. The city noise kept moving, cars rolling past, a distant siren somewhere blocks away, the hum of voices, but around him, it felt like silence had closed in tight, like the space between heartbeats. The man standing a few feet away didn't move closer, didn't raise his voice, but his eyes locked onto Marcus with a kind of certainty that didn't ask questions, it made accusations. Tall, clean-cut, dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than Marcus's rent for a year, the man held himself like someone used to being believed. And Marcus, standing there in worn sneakers and a faded hoodie, felt the distance between them stretch wider than the street itself. Just minutes earlier, Marcus had been walking back from the bus stop, cutting through the quieter part of the neighborhood where the sidewalks got cleaner and the houses stood taller, where trimmed hedges lined the edges of driveways and security cameras blinked quietly from corners. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. Not in a place where everything looked like it belonged to someone else. That's when he saw it. Lying near the curb, half tucked against the tire of a parked black SUV, like it had been dropped without notice. The wallet. He had picked it up slowly, glancing around, expecting someone to call out, to claim it, but no one did. When he opened it, the first thing he saw wasn't the ID, it was the money. Thick, crisp stacks of $100 bills, bound tight. The kind of cash Marcus had only ever seen behind glass or on screens. $10,000, maybe more. Enough to change things. Enough to cover overdue bills. Enough to keep the lights on without counting every dollar twice. Enough to make his mother stop pretending she wasn't tired. For a second, just a second, the world tilted. He could hear the echo of hospital monitors in his memory, the soft beep that never quite left his ears since last week. He could see his mom sitting on the edge of that stiff chair, shoulders slumped, trying to smile through the weight of everything they couldn't afford. The numbers had been clear. The insurance didn't cover all of it. It never did. And now here it was, sitting in his hand like an answer no one had asked out loud. But something deeper, something older than fear or need, held him steady. His fingers tightened around the wallet, then loosened again, like he was reminding himself it wasn't his. He flipped it open again, this time focusing past the money, finding the ID tucked into the clear sleeve. Daniel Whitmore. The name meant nothing to him at first, just letters printed clean and official, but the address. He recognized the street. He'd passed it before on the bus, the kind of place people talked about like it existed in a different city altogether. And that's when he made the decision. No hesitation after that. No bargaining. He walked, past blocks that grew quieter with each step, past houses that seemed to watch him as much as he watched them. His footsteps sounded louder here, echoing faintly against pavement that didn't crack or crumble. By the time he reached the end of the long driveway, the sky had shifted into that soft gray blue that comes just before evening settles in, and the air carried a stillness that felt expensive. He stood there for a moment, adjusting his grip on the wallet, his thumb brushing the edge of the leather, worn smooth in places from use. Then he turned, intending to head back toward the street, to find someone, anyone, who could help him return it properly. But he didn't get far. Did you take it? The voice came again, closer now, anchored behind him. Marcus turned slowly, his heart giving one hard, sudden beat against his chest. The man stepped forward from beside the SUV, his gaze fixed, unwavering. No smile, no curiosity, just certainty, the kind that didn't leave room for explanation. Marcus felt the weight of it settle over him, heavy as the wallet itself. His throat tightened, but his posture didn't break. He held the wallet out, not defensively, not reluctantly, just steady. The light from the street lamp flickered on above them, casting a pale glow across his face, catching the edges of the worn fabric on his sleeves, the scuffed tips of his shoes. Everything about him said he didn't belong here. Everything about the moment said he was already being judged. And still, he didn't step back. He didn't look away. He just stood there, hand extended, offering back something he never should have had to defend in the first place. Marcus did not lower his hand, even as the silence stretched longer than it should have, long enough for the faint buzz of a street lamp to become noticeable, long enough for the cool evening air to settle against his skin. The man's gaze flicked from Marcus's face to the wallet, then back again, measuring something that Marcus could not see but could feel pressing down on him all the same. "I asked you a question," the man said, his voice still controlled, but tighter now, like patience was thinning by the second. Marcus swallowed once, steadying his breath, and shook his head slightly. "No, sir," he said, his voice calm, even the way his mother had taught him when things felt unfair but needed to be handled right anyway. "I found it by the curb." The words hung there, simple and unembellished, but they did not seem to land the way Marcus hoped. The man stepped closer, just a few feet now, close enough for Marcus to notice the faint scent of cologne, sharp and clean, close enough to see the crease between his brows deepen as if the explanation did not match the expectation. For a moment, the man did not reach for the wallet. He just looked at it, then at Marcus again, as though trying to reconcile the image in front of him with something already decided in his mind. Marcus felt it then, that quiet shift, the unspoken assumption settling into place. He had felt it before, in stores where eyes followed him longer than necessary, in classrooms where teachers hesitated a second too long before calling on him, in places where he learned quickly that being still and respectful was sometimes the only way to move through without trouble. The gravel at the edge of the driveway crunched softly as another figure approached from the side, a security guard in a dark uniform, his steps deliberate, his attention already fixed on Marcus before a word was spoken. "Everything all right, Mr. Whitmore?" the guard asked, his tone professional but alert, his eyes scanning Marcus in a way that made the space feel smaller. The name settled into Marcus's mind now. Whitmore. The same name from the ID. The man did not answer right away. Instead, he finally reached out and took the wallet from Marcus's hand, his fingers brushing against Marcus's for the briefest second, a contact that felt colder than the evening air. He opened it immediately, flipping through the contents with practiced precision, counting without appearing to count, checking without needing to say what he was checking for. Marcus stood still, his arms now at his sides, his fingers curling slightly, as if they still remembered the shape of the wallet. The guard shifted his stance subtly, positioning himself just enough to block the path back to the street, not aggressively, but clearly. Marcus noticed. He always noticed things like that. The small adjustments. The silent decisions. "You said you found it," Whitmore said finally, his eyes still on the wallet. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied. His voice did not waver, but his chest felt tight, like the air had gotten heavier without warning. Whitmore glanced up again, this time longer, studying Marcus with a sharper focus, as if searching for something hidden behind his words. "And you decided to bring it here," he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes, sir," Marcus answered again. "Your address was inside." Another pause followed, quieter but heavier than before. The guard's radio crackled faintly at his shoulder, a burst of static that broke the stillness for just a second before fading again. Somewhere down the street, a car door slammed, the sound distant and disconnected from the moment unfolding here. Whitmore closed the wallet slowly, his thumb pressing along the edge, sealing it shut. His expression did not soften. If anything, it grew more unreadable, like he had reached a conclusion but had not yet decided what to do with it. Marcus felt the weight of that decision. Hovering, invisible but undeniable. He kept his posture straight, his gaze steady, not challenging, not submissive, just present. It was something his mother always said without saying it directly. "Stand right. Speak clear. Do not give anyone a reason to misunderstand you." The guard shifted again, just enough for Marcus to catch the movement out of the corner of his eye, reinforcing the boundary that had quietly formed around him. Whitmore exhaled slowly, a controlled breath, then glanced toward the guard. "Stay here," he said, not loudly, but firmly enough that it did not need to be repeated. The words were not directed at Marcus, but they landed on him all the same. "Stay here," as if leaving had ever been an option. Marcus nodded once, even though no one had asked him to, and remained exactly where he was, the fading light casting long shadows across the driveway, stretching the distance between who he was and what they seemed to see. Whitmore did not speak again right away, and that silence felt deliberate, like he was letting the moment stretch to see what Marcus would do with it. But Marcus did nothing except remain still, his weight balanced evenly on both feet, his eyes steady, his breathing slow and controlled. The guard's presence lingered just behind him, close enough that Marcus could hear the faint rustle of fabric when he shifted, close enough that it reminded Marcus of all the invisible lines people like him were expected not to cross. Whitmore turned slightly, glancing toward the house, then back at the wallet in his hand, his thumb brushing over the edge again, as if confirming something only he could feel. "How old are you?" he asked suddenly, his tone less sharp but still guarded. 17, sir," Marcus replied without hesitation. Whitmore nodded once, though it did not seem like approval, more like a mental note being filed away. "And you thought it was a good idea to walk up here alone with $10,000 that does not belong to you," he said. Again, not quite a question. Marcus felt the weight of the words, the implication beneath them, but he answered the same way he had been taught, direct and honest. "Yes, sir," he said, "because it is yours." The simplicity of it seemed to hang in the air longer than anything else that had been said so far. Whitmore's eyes shifted, narrowing slightly, as if the answer did not fit the narrative he had already begun to form. For a brief moment, something flickered there, not quite doubt, not quite understanding, but enough to interrupt the certainty that had been there before. The guard glanced between them, his posture still firm, still alert, but less rigid now, as if even he was waiting for what would come next. A faint breeze moved through the driveway, lifting the edge of Marcus's hoodie, carrying with it the distant smell of cut grass and something else, something softer, like the quiet of a place where nothing urgent ever seemed to happen. It was a different kind of world than the one Marcus came from, where urgency was constant, where every decision carried weight. Whitmore stepped back half a pace, creating just enough space to shift the dynamic, though the tension did not leave. He opened the wallet again, slower this time, more deliberate, flipping through each section carefully, checking the cards, the cash, the compartments. Marcus watched without moving, his eyes following the motion not out of suspicion, but out of awareness, understanding exactly what was being looked for even if it was never spoken out loud. Trust was not something given easily here. It had to be proven, piece by piece, even when the proof was already in plain sight. "Nothing is missing," Whitmore said finally, his voice quieter now, more to himself than to anyone else. The statement settled into the space between them, shifting something, small but noticeable. The guard's shoulders eased just slightly, the tension in his stance loosening by a fraction. Marcus did not react outwardly, but inside, something unclenched, just enough to let him take a fuller breath. Whitmore closed the wallet again, this time without the earlier tightness in his grip, and looked at Marcus differently, not with warmth, not yet, but with less certainty than before. "Most people would not have brought this back," he said. There was no accusation in the words now, just observation. Marcus nodded. Once, his gaze dropping briefly before lifting again. "My mom says if it is not yours, it does not stay with you," he said. His voice was steady, but there was something else in it now, something quieter, something rooted deeper than the moment itself. Whitmore's expression shifted again, subtle but real, like a memory had brushed against the edges of his thoughts. He looked away for a second, toward the house, toward the quiet structure that stood behind him, then back at Marcus. The distance between them felt different now, not smaller exactly, but less rigid, less fixed. The guard took a step back, not leaving, but no longer blocking the path in the same way. The invisible boundary had not disappeared, but it had moved. Whitmore adjusted his stance, his shoulders no longer as tense, his posture less defensive, though still controlled. "What is your name?" he asked. "Marcus Reed, sir," Marcus answered. Whitmore nodded again, this time slower, as if committing it to memory. The streetlight above them hummed faintly, casting a steady glow across the driveway, illuminating the scene with a quiet clarity that made every detail feel sharper, more defined. Marcus stood there, still in the same place, still holding himself the same way, but the air around him no longer felt as heavy. Not yet light, not yet safe, but shifting, always shifting. And in that small shift, something had begun to change, even if neither of them had fully named it yet. Whitmore turned the wallet once in his hand, slower now, as if the object itself had changed weight since the moment Marcus first held it, and for a brief second he seemed to hesitate, like there was something unfinished in the air that he could not quite name. Marcus noticed it, the slight pause, The way Whitmore's fingers no longer pressed tightly against the leather, but rested instead, almost thoughtful. The guard shifted another step back, not fully retreating, but no longer anchoring Marcus in place, the invisible lines softening just enough to breathe through. The evening light deepened, the sky settling into a dim blue that reflected faintly across the polished surface of the SUV, and somewhere nearby a sprinkler clicked. On, the rhythmic sound marking time in a space that had been suspended only moments before. "You said you were heading back to the bus stop," Whitmore said, his tone quieter now, less edged with suspicion and more measured, like he was recalibrating something internal. Marcus nodded once. "Yes, sir," he replied. "I just got off work." Whitmore's gaze lingered again, not scanning this time, not searching for fault, but observing, taking in the worn seams of Marcus's hoodie, the slight dust on his sneakers, the way he stood without shifting, without trying to justify himself beyond what had already been said. There was a steadiness there that did not match what Whitmore expected when he first saw him. "Where do you work?" Whitmore asked. "Grocery store on Maple Avenue," Marcus answered. "Stocking shelves after school." The answer came simply, without pride or complaint, just fact. Whitmore nodded again, slower this time, as if each piece of information was settling into a larger picture he had not fully seen before. The guard glanced toward Whitmore, then back at Marcus, his posture now neutral, almost distant, like the situation had shifted out of his hands entirely. Whitmore slipped the wallet into the inside pocket of his jacket, the motion smooth, practiced, but lacking the earlier urgency. "Most people would have kept it," he said again, this time not as a test, but as a statement he seemed to be reconsidering. Marcus did not respond right away. He looked down briefly at the ground, at the clean, unbroken pavement beneath his feet, then back up. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I would have known." The words were soft, but they landed with a weight that did not need to be explained. Whitmore's eyes held on him a second longer, something unreadable passing through them, something quieter than doubt, but deeper than simple acknowledgement. For the first time, the tension in his shoulders eased completely, just a fraction, but enough to change the space between them. He took a step to the side, no longer blocking the driveway, no longer standing between Marcus and the street. It was a small movement, but it carried meaning. Marcus noticed that too. He always noticed. "Do you need a ride?" Whitmore asked suddenly, the question unexpected, almost out of place against everything that had come before. Marcus blinked once, surprised not by the offer itself, but by the shift it represented. He shook his head gently. "No, sir. I am okay," he said. Whitmore did not insist. He simply nodded, accepting the answer without challenge. Another quiet moment passed, the kind that no longer pressed but allowed space. The sprinkler continued its steady rhythm, water catching the light in brief arcs that shimmered and disappeared. The guard turned slightly, his attention now outward, scanning the street in a routine motion that had lost its earlier focus on Marcus. Whitmore looked at Marcus again, but this time there was no edge, no immediate judgment, just a measured presence, as if he was seeing him more clearly than before. "Marcus Reed," he said, repeating the name, not as a question, but as confirmation. Marcus nodded once. "Yes, sir." Whitmore exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed to release something held too tightly moments earlier. He adjusted his jacket, his posture settling into something more natural, less guarded. "You did the right thing," he said. The words were simple, but they did not feel automatic. They felt considered, deliberate. Marcus gave a small nod, not seeking recognition, not lingering on it, just accepting it the way he accepted most things, quietly. The streetlight above them cast a steady glow, illuminating both of them equally now, no longer dividing the space into sides, but holding it together in a shared stillness. Marcus took a small step back, testing the space, confirming without words that he was no longer being held in place. Nothing stopped him. No voice. No movement. Just open air and the quiet hum of the evening. He turned slightly toward the street, ready to leave, but not rushed, not eager, just moving forward as he had intended from the beginning. Behind him, Whitmore remained where he stood, watching, not with suspicion, but with something closer to reflection, like the moment had shifted more than just a single assumption. And as Marcus walked down the driveway, the sound of his footsteps, soft against the pavement, The distance between them no longer felt like a divide, but like something that had, even if only slightly, begun to close. Marcus did not look back as he reached the end of the driveway, but he could still feel it, the weight of the moment lingering behind him like a shadow that had not quite let go. The street stretched ahead, quieter now, the soft glow of evenly spaced streetlights guiding the path toward the bus stop a few blocks down. His footsteps were steady, measured, but inside, something was still unsettled, not from fear, but from the way everything had almost gone wrong without actually crossing the line. He had done what was right. He knew that. But knowing it and being seen for it were not always the same thing. The air felt cooler now, brushing lightly against his face, carrying with it the faint scent of damp grass from the sprinklers and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. He slipped his hands into the pockets of his hoodie, his fingers curling into the soft fabric as if grounding himself in something familiar. Behind him, Whitmore remained standing in the driveway, though Marcus could no longer see him, only sensed the presence of a man who had not moved on as quickly as expected. Whitmore watched Marcus walk away, the image lingering longer than it should have, replaying in a way that felt unfamiliar, like a question without a clear answer. He had seen situations like this before, or at least he thought he had, moments where things were taken, where assumptions had proven correct, where trust had been misplaced. That had been the pattern. Predictable, reinforced over time. But this had not followed that pattern. Not even close. He reached into his jacket again, pulling the wallet out once more, opening it slowly as if expecting something to be different this time, something he might have missed. The cash was still there, untouched, the cards neatly aligned, everything exactly as it should be. Yet it did not feel the same as it had minutes ago. It felt heavier now, not physically, but in a way that pressed somewhere deeper, somewhere quieter. The guard shifted nearby, his posture relaxed now, his earlier alertness replaced with routine calm. "Everything good, sir?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer had changed. Whitmore did not respond immediately. He closed the wallet again, his fingers resting on it longer than necessary. He could have walked away, Whitmore said finally, almost to himself. The guard gave a small nod. "Yes, sir," he replied. Most would have. Whitmore exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting toward the street where Marcus had disappeared from view. The thought settled in differently now, not as a comparison to others, but as something more personal, more specific. He had not just doubted a situation. He had doubted a person standing right in front of him. And that realization did not sit easily. It lingered, pressing against the edges of his composure in a way he was not used to. He turned slightly, glancing back toward the house, the large structure standing quiet and still, its windows reflecting the fading light of evening. It looked the same as it always did, controlled, orderly, untouched by the small moment that had just unfolded outside its walls. But Whitmore did not feel quite the same walking back toward it. His steps slowed as he reached the entrance, his hand pausing on the door handle before pushing it open. Inside, the air was cool and still, the soft hum of climate control filling the silence, a stark contrast to the open space he had just left behind. He stepped in, the door closing quietly behind him, but the moment outside did not stay there. It followed him in, lingering in the quiet corners of his thoughts. He moved through the foyer, his shoes barely making a sound against the polished floor, his reflection passing across the glass surfaces lining the walls. Everything was in place, everything exactly as it should be, and yet something felt slightly off, like a detail that had shifted just enough to be noticed, but not yet understood. He stopped near the center of the room, the wallet still in his hand, and for a brief moment, he simply stood there, the silence pressing in. Then, without fully deciding to, he turned back toward the door. Outside, the night had settled deeper, the streetlights now, casting longer, steadier pools of light along the sidewalk. Marcus was gone. Of course he was. He had no reason to stay. But the absence felt louder than the presence had been. Whitmore stepped out again, just a few steps past the doorway, his eyes scanning the street, as if expecting to catch a glimpse of something already out of reach. Nothing moved except the distant flicker of headlights passing through an intersection blocks away. The world had continued, unchanged. But for Whitmore, something had shifted, something quiet and persistent that did not fade with distance. He looked down at the wallet one last time, then closed his hand around it, firmer now, not with suspicion, but with decision. The night air settled around him, cool and steady, and for the first time since the moment began, he was not standing still because of uncertainty. He was standing still because he was thinking, and that was something he did not do lightly. Somewhere down the street, out of sight, Marcus kept walking, unaware that the moment he had already left behind had not finished unfolding. Marcus reached the bus stop just as the overhead light flickered once and steadied, casting a pale circle onto the cracked pavement beneath his feet, the metal bench cool and slightly damp from the evening air. He sat down slowly, elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped together as he stared at the quiet street in front of him, where headlights passed every few minutes but never slowed. The moment from the driveway replayed in fragments, not loud or overwhelming, but persistent, like a low echo that refused to fade. The question, the pause, the look, not new, never new, but still something he felt every time, even when he did everything right. He exhaled slowly, his breath visible for just a second in the cooling air, then gone. Across town, Whitmore stood in his doorway longer than he intended, the night settling around him with a stillness that made everything feel more defined, more honest than it had in the daylight. The wallet remained in his hand, but it was no longer the focus. The image of Marcus standing there, steady, composed, offering something back without hesitation, had taken its place. It did not align with the assumptions he had carried for years, the patterns he trusted because they had always confirmed what he expected to see. And now, those patterns felt incomplete. Not broken, but challenged. He stepped back inside once more, closing the door quietly behind him, the sound soft but final. The house greeted him with the same controlled silence, the same precise arrangement of everything. Yet it felt different now, like the stillness was no longer neutral but reflective. He moved through the space slowly, his steps measured, his attention not on where he was going, but on what he had just left behind. The kitchen lights turned on automatically as he entered, illuminating polished countertops and untouched surfaces, everything exactly in place. He set the wallet down gently, not as an object to be secured, but as something to be considered. For a moment, he simply stood there, his hands resting on the edge of the counter, his gaze fixed but unfocused, as if the answers he was looking for were not in front of him, but somewhere just beyond reach. The memory shifted again, not to the wallet, not to the money, but to the words Marcus had spoken. Simple, direct, uncomplicated. My mom says if it is not yours, it does not stay with you. Whitmore repeated the sentence quietly under his breath, the cadence of it unfamiliar in his own voice. It did not sound like something rehearsed. It sounded lived. He leaned back slightly, his shoulders loosening as he let the thought settle, not resisting it, not dismissing it. Somewhere deeper, something adjusted, something small but undeniable. At the bus stop, Marcus shifted his weight, leaning back against the cold metal of the bench, his eyes following the faint glow of a bus approaching in the distance, its headlights growing brighter with each passing second. He did not think about the money anymore. He had already made that decision the moment he picked up the wallet. What lingered instead was quieter, more personal. The feeling of being seen one way, then another. The narrow space between those two versions, and how easily someone could be placed on the wrong side of it. He rubbed his hands together briefly, warming them, then let them rest again, his posture relaxed but not careless. The bus pulled up with a soft hiss of air brakes, the doors opening with a mechanical sigh. Marcus stood, stepping forward without hesitation, reaching into his pocket for his transit card. The driver gave him a brief nod as he boarded, the interior lights warm compared to the cool night outside. He moved toward the back, taking a seat by the window, watching as the street slid slowly past, the neighborhood changing block by block, the houses shrinking, the sidewalks cracking, the spaces becoming more familiar with each turn. Back in the kitchen, Whitmore straightened, his gaze returning to the wallet resting on the counter. He picked it up again, not to check it this time, but to hold it, to feel its presence in a way that was no longer about ownership. The quiet hum of the house filled the space, steady and constant, but his thoughts were elsewhere, tracing back through the moment again, not to confirm what he had seen, but to understand what he had almost missed. He walked toward the window, looking out at the darkened street, the same one Marcus had walked down just minutes earlier. It was empty now, still, the streetlights casting long, unmoving shadows. For a brief moment, he stood there, saying nothing, doing nothing, just allowing the silence to exist without filling it. And in that silence, the shift became clearer, not dramatic, not sudden, but real. Something had changed, not outside, but within the way he saw what had happened. And that change did not come with noise or certainty. It came quietly, like the settling of light at the end of the day, steady and undeniable. The bus moved steadily through the night, its engine humming low and constant, the rhythm of it almost lulling. But Marcus did not lean back or close his eyes like the others scattered across the seats. He stayed upright, his gaze fixed on the window, watching reflections pass over his face as streetlights flickered by in measured intervals. Each block shifted the scenery slightly, from wide, quiet streets to tighter rows of buildings, from silence to the distant murmur of voices and televisions behind thin walls. It was a transition he knew well, one he could trace without thinking, but tonight it felt sharper, more defined, like every detail had been outlined more clearly than before. His fingers rested lightly against his knees, still, controlled, as if the steadiness he carried earlier had not left him, only settled deeper. Across town, Whitmore remained by the window longer than he realized. His silhouette reflected faintly against the glass, overlapping with the darkness outside. The street beyond was empty now, the absence of movement making it easier to replay what had already happened. Not the surface of it, not the simple exchange, but the layers beneath, the assumptions that had risen so quickly, so automatically, without question. He had not needed evidence. He had relied on something else. Something quieter, more ingrained. And now that he had seen it clearly, he could not ignore it. He turned away from the window slowly, the room behind him unchanged, yet holding a different weight. The wallet remained where he had placed it earlier, resting on the counter, untouched. He walked toward it again, not out of habit this time, but with intention. When he picked it up, he did not open it. He simply held it, feeling the shape of it in his hand, the same object that had been returned without hesitation, without negotiation. That was what stayed with him. Not the money, not the inconvenience of losing it, but the absence of hesitation from someone who had every reason to walk away. Back on the bus, Marcus shifted slightly as it slowed to a stop, the doors opening with that same soft release of air. A few passengers stepped off, their movements quiet, routine, unnoticed. He remained seated, his stop still a few minutes away, his reflection steady in the glass. He did not replay the words anymore. He replayed the feeling, the moment where everything could have turned, the space between being trusted and being doubted. It was not anger that settled in him. It was something more familiar, something he had learned to carry without letting it shape him. His mother's voice echoed in memory, not loud, not instructive, just present. Do what is right, even when it is not easy, even when no one sees it. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders easing just a fraction, the tension not gone, but understood. Whitmore moved through the house again, slower this time, his steps quieter, as if the silence now required respect instead of control. He stopped near a small hallway table where framed photographs lined the surface, images from different points in time, moments carefully chosen and preserved. His eyes passed over them without stopping at first, then paused, drawn to one in particular. It was older, slightly faded at the edges, a picture of his mother seated beside a hospital bed, her expression soft but tired, the kind of exhaustion that comes from staying strong longer than expected. Whitmore leaned in slightly, his gaze narrowing, something connecting, something aligning in a way that made his breath slow. There, just behind her, partially out of focus, was a figure he had not paid attention to before. A nurse, standing quietly, adjusting a blanket, her posture calm, her presence steady. He had not noticed her then, but now, something about it felt familiar. The posture, the stillness, the way she stood without drawing attention, yet holding the moment together. He straightened slowly, the realization not sudden, but building, like pieces of something long forgotten beginning to return. Back on the bus, Marcus pulled the cord lightly as his stop approached, the bell signaling softly through the vehicle. He stood, moving toward the door with the same quiet confidence he carried through everything, stepping down onto the sidewalk as the bus pulled away behind him. The air here was different, warmer somehow, filled with the distant sounds of conversation, Music playing faintly from an open window, life continuing in ways that felt closer, more immediate. He walked toward the small apartment building at the end of the block, the porch light flickering slightly above the entrance, casting a soft glow across the worn steps. He paused for just a second before reaching the door, not out of hesitation, but to settle himself, to leave the weight of the outside world where it belonged. Inside, Whitmore remained still, the photograph still in his hand, his gaze fixed on that small, overlooked detail that now carried more meaning than the entire frame. The connection was not fully formed yet, not complete, but it was there, undeniable, pressing forward. The room around him remained silent, but his thoughts were not. They moved, slowly but steadily, towards something that had not yet been spoken, something that would not stay hidden much longer. The hallway light inside Marcus's apartment flickered once before settling into a soft, steady glow, casting long shadows along the narrow walls as he stepped in and closed the door quietly behind him. The familiar scent of home met him immediately, something warm, something lived in, something that did not shift based on who walked through the door. From the small kitchen, the low hum of a kettle warming on the stove filled the space, and beyond it, he could hear the faint rustle of movement. "Marcus," Angela's voice came, gentle but tired, carrying that same strength she never let fully slip. Marcus stepped forward, setting his bag down near the door, his shoulders easing just slightly as he crossed into the kitchen. She stood by the counter, one hand resting lightly against it for balance, the other wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, steam rising slowly into the dim light above. Her eyes lifted to meet his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. She studied his face the way she always did, not looking for trouble, but for truth, for the small things he did not say out loud. "Long day?" she asked quietly. Marcus nodded once. "Yeah," he replied, his voice steady. He moved to the sink, running the tap briefly, the sound filling the silence between them in a way that felt natural, not forced. Angela watched him for a second longer, then gave a small nod, as if whatever she saw in him was enough. "There is some soup on the stove," she said. "Still warm." Marcus glanced over, the pot sitting exactly where it always did, simple, consistent, reliable. "Thank you, Mom," he said softly. He reached for a bowl, the motion familiar, routine, grounding. Across town, Whitmore remained standing in front of the hallway table, the photograph still in his hand, his gaze fixed on that single detail that had shifted everything into a different light. He moved closer to the lamp, angling the frame to catch more of the image, his focus narrowing as memory began to align with what he was seeing. The hospital room, the quiet presence of a nurse who did not draw attention but never left the room feeling empty. The way his mother had looked calmer when she was there, even on the hardest days. He had not asked her name then. He had not thought to. But now, standing in the quiet of his home, that absence felt significant. He set the photograph down carefully, then reached for his phone, his movements deliberate, his expression no longer guarded but intent. He scrolled through contacts, stopping on one labeled simply with the name of the hospital, then pressed call. The line rang twice before connecting, a calm, professional voice answering on the other end. Whitmore's tone was measured, but there was a quiet urgency beneath it, something that had not been there earlier. "I need to confirm something," he said, his eyes drifting back toward the photograph as he spoke. Back in the apartment, Marcus sat at the small kitchen table, the bowl of soup in front of him, steam rising in slow curls that caught the light. Angela sat across from him now, her hands wrapped around her mug, watching him with that same quiet attentiveness. "You are quiet tonight," she said gently. Marcus paused, the spoon resting briefly in the bowl before he set it down. He looked at her, really looked, taking in the faint lines of fatigue around her eyes, the strength that held her upright even when everything weighed heavy. "I found a wallet," he said finally. Angela's expression shifted slightly, not surprised, but attentive. "And?" she asked. Marcus met her gaze, steady. "It had a lot of money in it," he continued. $10,000. The number settled into the room, quiet but heavy. Angela did not react immediately. She simply waited. "I gave it back," Marcus said. The words were simple, but they carried everything. Angela's shoulders lowered just slightly, a breath she had not realized she was holding releasing slowly. She nodded once, her eyes softening, something like relief and pride mixing quietly beneath the surface. "I know you did," she said. No hesitation, no question, just certainty. Marcus looked down for a moment, the corner of his mouth lifting faintly, not in pride, but in something steadier, something more rooted. Across town, Whitmore stood still as the voice on the other end of the call responded, confirming details he had not expected to hear, but now could not ignore. The name came through clearly, unmistakable. Angela Reed. He closed his eyes briefly, the connection settling into place, no longer a question, no longer a possibility, but a fact. The same woman. The same quiet presence he had overlooked years ago. The same name Marcus had spoken just minutes earlier. He ended the call slowly, his hand lowering, the room around him unchanged, but his understanding entirely shifted. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy with realization, with recognition, with something that moved beyond coincidence into something deeper. He turned toward the door again, not hesitating this time, his steps already forming a direction. Back in the small apartment, Angela reached across the table, her hand resting lightly over Marcus's for just a second, a simple gesture, but one that carried everything she did not need to say. Marcus looked up, meeting her eyes, and in that quiet exchange, there was no doubt, no question, just understanding. Outside, the night held steady, the city moving as it always did, unaware that in two different places, something had shifted, something that would not remain still for long. The knock came just after sunrise, soft but deliberate, the kind that did not belong to someone unsure of where they stood. Marcus had already been awake, sitting at the small kitchen table with a glass of water in front of him, the early light filtering through the thin curtains, casting a pale gold across the worn surface. Angela stood by the sink, rinsing a cup slowly, her movements steady but unhurried, the quiet of the morning wrapping around them like something fragile. The sound came again, clearer this time. Both of them paused, not startled, just aware. Marcus stood first, his chair scraping lightly against the floor, his steps measured as he moved toward the door. He did not rush. He never rushed. He reached for the handle and opened it slowly. Whitmore stood there, framed by the morning light, his suit replaced with something simpler, a dark jacket. No tie, his posture still composed but no longer distant. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The space between them held everything from the night before, but it did not feel tense. It felt resolved, even before a word was said. Marcus stepped back slightly, opening the door wider. Whitmore nodded once, a small gesture, then stepped inside, his gaze shifting briefly to take in the space, not with judgment, but with quiet attention. Angela turned from the sink, her eyes landing on him, and for a second, the room seemed to hold its breath. Recognition did not come all at once. It unfolded slowly, like a memory surfacing from somewhere deeper than thought. Whitmore met her gaze, and something in his expression softened in a way that had not been visible before. "Ms. Reed," he said quietly. Angela's hand stilled against the counter, the cup forgotten for a moment. She looked at him more closely now, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus, searching through time, through moments that had once passed without weight. And then it came, not sudden, but certain. "Mr. Whitmore," she replied, her voice just above a whisper, carrying both surprise and something steadier beneath it. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of connection, of recognition that had waited years to be named. Marcus stood between them, his eyes moving from one to the other, understanding not fully formed, but present enough to feel. Whitmore stepped forward slowly, his hands visible, his posture open in a way that did not demand but offered. "I did not know," he said, his voice measured, but carrying something deeper now, something honest. "Not last night." Angela nodded once, her expression calm, not defensive, not distant, just present. "There was no reason you would," she said. The words were simple, but they carried no blame. Whitmore exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed to release something he had held since the moment the connection became clear. He reached into his jacket, not hurried, and placed an envelope on the table, sliding it gently toward Marcus. The paper made a soft sound against the wood, quiet but unmistakable. Marcus looked down at it, then back up, his gaze steady, not immediately reaching for it. Whitmore noticed. "It is not payment," he said, his tone firm but respectful. And it is not charity. He paused, choosing his words with care. It is an opportunity. For both of you. Angela stepped closer now, her presence steady beside Marcus, her hand resting lightly against the back of his chair. Whitmore continued, his voice even, but no longer distant. There is a program I fund. Scholarships. Support for families dealing with medical costs and education at the same time. He glanced at Marcus briefly, then back to Angela. I would like Marcus to be part of it. And I would like to help cover what the insurance does not. The words settled into the room quietly, without force, without expectation. Marcus did not move right away. He looked at his mother. Angela's eyes met his. And in that moment, there was no rush to answer, no pressure to accept. Just understanding. The same understanding she had always given him. Do what is right, not what is easy. Whitmore stood still, not pushing, not filling the silence, allowing it to exist the way it needed to. The morning light shifted slightly, brightening the room, touching the edges of the table, the envelope, their hands. Marcus finally reached forward, not quickly, not hesitantly, just with intention. He rested his hand on the envelope, not opening it, just acknowledging its presence. Then he looked back up at Whitmore. Thank you, he said quietly. The words were simple, but they carried weight, not of obligation, but of recognition. Whitmore nodded once, not smiling, but something in his expression had changed, something quieter, more grounded. Angela's hand moved gently to Marcus's shoulder, a light touch, but steady, anchoring. No one spoke after that. They did not need to. The room held a different kind of silence now, one that did not come from tension or uncertainty, but from something resolved, something understood without explanation. Outside, the morning continued, light spreading slowly across the street, touching the small apartment building, the sidewalk, the space where footsteps would soon pass again. Inside, 3 people stood in that quiet, not divided by distance or assumption anymore, but connected by something far simpler and far stronger. And in that stillness, there was no need for anything else to be said.